Hello everyone and welcome to Project One Sky's Amy Interviews series. My name is Amy and I'll be your host throughout the series. Today I am speaking with Tony Griffin. Tony is an ex-Clare hurler who was nominated for an All-Star 3 times and was included into the GAA All-Star team as a left corner forward in 2006. He has since founded the SOAR Foundation, which is a collective movement that delivers workshops to Irish teenagers across the country. He has also written 2 books, including The Teenager's Book of Life, which I recently read and I would highly recommend for both teenagers and their parents. I had a great time interviewing Tony and I really hope you enjoy the interview too. The first part will be shown now and we'll be back very shortly with the second section, so keep an eye out. Hi Tony, thanks a million for coming on to talk to me today. I've read your book and I think it's a brilliant read and I'm so grateful to have you on here to answer my few questions. So I'll start off.
Pleasure.
Thank you. I'll start off. What inspired you to write The Teenager's Book of Life? And I think where did you just get the idea for the book?
I think what inspired me to write it was I'd spent 9 years working with teenagers through an organization that I co-founded called SOAR. And in these workshops, very often, Amy, I'd meet people like you, 16, and I'd get this, like, my mind blown that there was so much more going on for you and you were so much wiser than most people would realize. And adults very often look at teenagers and go, they're just teenagers, but they don't realize actually they can be really wise, really intuitive. And I just thought that the more I learned about how we educate teenagers, educate people at all, it hasn't changed since I was in school. Yet when I was meeting thousands of teenagers, I realized, hold on, we're missing helping them understand their life and their place in the world in a way that they need to understand it in order to go on and fulfill who they are. And so I just said to myself, I was actually working on a different book. And then I met someone who said, but surely you're going to do something in all those years talking to teenagers. And I said, no, I don't really think I will. And then one day I started and it just kept coming. So I wrote it as a way to, I suppose what inspired me to write it was, I just thought it could be better how we educate, connect with teenagers. And there was loads of things I'd wished at 15 I had known about the world, that someone had just told me that this is going to happen, but you won't be the only one going through it, or that is going to happen, but don't worry, it'll be okay. Yeah. And so I just wish someone had pulled me aside and said that. So I said, well, I'm going to say it and maybe it'll help someone. And now it's helping a lot of people, which is great.
It is. And I really, like, me myself, from reading the book, it really did help me, even going forward in my own life, in school, going further on into college. I just want to maybe go back. Could you take me back to yourself as a 16-year-old like me? You grew up in County Clare, and if you could give yourself as a teenager one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, when I was 16, like, I know sport's a big thing in your life. When I was 16, sport was a big thing in my life. I played hurling, I played football, like Gaelic football, and I played soccer or football. And I loved all 3, but I think where I grew up, hurling was particularly popular and it was the main show in town, really. And when I was 16, I was really starting to break onto the Clare scene. So I was like playing under 16. I was getting ready to play minor. And I don't think I believed in myself enough. I thought I saw all my deficiencies. Like, I saw that I was tall and lanky and skinny and thin, that maybe I wasn't powerful and strong. I saw all my deficiencies and I've overlooked my huge amount of positive attributes. So I think if I was to walk into, me as 16, this is kind of weird to kind of put this all together. But if I was to walk over to myself as 16, I'd say, look, man, you're going to go on and play for Clare. So don't worry about that. You're going to play in Croke Park. All your dreams are going to come true. So do you know what? Just relax. It's all going to happen. As I say that, I'd probably say the same to myself now.
That's it.
Yeah. But yeah, and I just say to myself, look, keep reminding yourself of all the good things you have in your arsenal, because very often I would have looked at what I didn't have, and it drove me on, but it also meant I didn't always enjoy the journey as much as I could have.
Yes, perfect. You mentioned earlier on the SOAR Foundation, where you worked with hundreds, probably even thousands of teenagers, just talking to them. I would just like for the people listening, if you could kind of give them a brief insight into what the SOAR Foundation is, or what they do to help teenagers.
Yeah. So the big thing about SOAR was I had my own difficult period in 2008, 2009. My dad had died from cancer a few years beforehand. I was living in Canada at the time, so I didn't get to come back and see him before he died in his last hours. And so my way of dealing with that grief was to do something. And that something was to cycle a bicycle from one side of Canada, from Vancouver to Halifax on the other side, so 7,000 kilometers. And it raised a lot of money. That summer alone, it raised around €500,000. But afterwards, I realized I still hadn't dealt with the grief. And that's one of the things that, like, there's a chapter on death in the Teenager's Book of Life, because no one had ever probably had a conversation with me and said, look, you're going to go through what's called grief, and this is what it's going to feel like. So I just blindly stumbled through it. And in 2008, I suppose, would have had a very rough year mentally, a very dark year, and a year that I look back now and I can say, oh, that was a blessing. But at the time, it just felt horrendous. So then in 2010, I saw a documentary on RTE about this guy called Jim Steins, and he was doing stuff down in Melbourne in Australia with young people that was really interesting to me. I didn't really know why, but something kind of drew me in that direction. And I went to Melbourne, and myself and another guy studied what Reach did. That's what they were called, Reach. And we said, this makes sense. Of course, at that age where you're trying to figure out who you are, where you want to go, wouldn't it be amazing to actually be able to take off the mask that everything's great, and I just take that off and put it aside and say, look, this is actually who I really am, and I'm not sure about this. And my parents are arguing. Sometimes I don't want to be at home, and I fell out with my friend last week, but I really like him, and now we're not mates. And fancy this girl, don't think she fancies me because I don't. All this stuff. Imagine if we could just throw that out and talk about it. Imagine how much easier it would be. And that's what Reach did. And so we just said, let's bring this to Ireland. And it was cool. It wasn't like a soppy self-help group. It was cool. The facilitators were cool. The conversations were real. They felt like they were alive. And so what SOAR does in its essence is it helps young people make the transition from childhood to adulthood in such a way that they have a strong character. So they're resilient. They understand, they're self-aware. They understand who they are. They have a sense of where they want to go with their life. They know what they're going to need to do to get there. And they're finding who they are. Now, they do it in schools. We've been doing it for 9 years, and it's really effective. So it's funny, the one thing I loved about SOAR was it felt so real.
Yeah.
Like for 3 hours, I could be running a SOAR workshop, and I'd hear about, maybe a kid who had like 15, who had an eating disorder, and someone else would stand up and say, I used to have that. This is what I did to overcome that. And that's what I mean by I got to learn how wise people are when they're telling their stories honestly. And then I'd come out of those workshops, after 3 hours, and I go into everyday life. Like, you drive out of the school and I'd be like, oh my God, every other part of life is so great.
Yeah.
Because it's all fake and false, and everyone's just trying to pretend that they have all figured out when they don't. And I would just having left this group of teenagers that were so inspiring. So I was living these two lives. And over time, I realized that the one that happened with teenagers was the world I wanted to live in. And so with my friends, I started having those conversations. And then we'd have different relationships then, because I'd say maybe a friend of mine would, be quiet. And I'd say, what's going on? They'd say, oh, nothing. I'd say, no, there's something going on. And I know there is. And then they'd talk to me about, well, I miss my dad. I haven't seen him in years. And so we had these amazing friendships, and they were all built on what I learned from teenagers.
It's such a great insight. I think, as you said, talking. It's just about talking, really opening up, and it can be so difficult, especially if you're going through a hard time. But even from me, talking is your best option, I think.
Yeah, because we're all trying to make sense of where we're at in our life. And some people, they'll sail through childhood, sail through teenage, and then they'll hit hard times when they're 30 or 40. Whereas others meet them earlier. They might be adopted at an early age and have difficulties in the foster family. There's so many ways to live a life.
Yeah.
But I just think it's so much more meaningful when we actually get to talk about that. And that doesn't mean you're pouring your heart out. Sometimes you'll be laughing through the tears. Sometimes there'll be no tears at all. But it's let's be honest, like, about life. Let's not pretend, but we're so afraid that we won't, we'll appear weak, or we'll appear like we don't have life figured out, when if we dropped our guards, everyone else would see they can't do. And that's what SOAR does brilliantly. And that's what I think I try to do in the book, is allow people a chance to just drop their guards and admire themselves for who they are, rather than think that they're the only one.
I also feel like maybe if at least one person dropped their guard, as you said, it could maybe be like a domino effect, a chain effect, and it could just change the whole insight,
Completely.
Working with the teenagers you've worked with, I'm interested in kind of the big issues you saw in your own facing teenagers, and in your opinion, what pressures face teenagers living in today's world?
Oh, such a good question, because there are so many in some ways. So different things came up, like everything from identity, that might be, I don't know who I am, or it might be regret about something that happened in their lives. That could be identity around sexuality, or, on multiple occasions, people came out in the workshop, which I always thought was amazing, because 99 times, every time, never once did I not see it. People admired them for that, because it took courage. But very often it's just something's happened to them, Amy, like, maybe it's their parents are divorced and didn't go well, or their granny died and they never talk about it because they don't want to upset their parents, or they've fallen out with a friend, just life. But obviously, a lot of the issues would be self-harm, or people teenagers who'd gone through particularly difficult episode in their life, like depression. No one knew about it. Maybe even their best friend didn't know about it. They just did it on their own. Things like that. And then there was many things where social media, obviously massive, the whole pressure to fit in, the pressure to, you see other people on Instagram and they look like they're having an amazing life. You look at your life and you say, well, I'm not measuring up my life in comparison to that. And so there's a lot of almost a lack of self-acceptance and lack of reality, that life isn't what you see on Instagram for any of us, not always. So a range of issues, but I would say just life issues. The big one at the moment, I think, for a lot of teenagers is, and I'm seeing this more and more, is how school isn't working for them. For some who are highly academic, it works well, but even for those, there's still something missing in that's the part SOAR would bring, a sense of, I can really come in here and be myself. Whereas for a huge amount, I'd say maybe 75, 80%, school isn't working for them. And they're dropping out because they don't feel inspired by it. They feel like, if anything, is draining them of life. So I think school at the moment is a big challenge. And obviously with COVID and everything that's going on, it's impacting teenagers the most, because like teenagers, that stage of life is all about meaning, like looking for meaning, novelty, and social connection. All three things are taken away when you can't freely socialize.
COVID has been even a big impact on my own life.
I was just going to say, how's it impacted you?
Even the online learning, and it was just not being able to speak face to face with my friends, and it's gotten a lot better. I'm in TY now, and
are you like, you're going into school, but is it
I'm going
different?
into school. Thankfully, my school, they've been great. And
what's your school, Amy?
Ashburn Community School.
I
live in
it.
County
I
Meath.
know I know it well. I was there many times running workshops.
Oh really? Yeah, we've been doing loads of workshops.
Cool.
So it's brilliant. And even that, bringing people into the school kind of just opens your mind to loads of different things. And I think it's not just, as you said, like, it's great for people who, love studying and all this, like, but TY kind of opens it up to everyone, can kind of get involved. There's a different place for everyone.
Yeah. And are you enjoying TY because of that?
Oh yeah, I'm loving it, really.
That's great.
It's brilliant.
And that's maybe an example of what I think the future of school could look like, more like TY, where it's more about learning about life, learning about who you are.
That's it.
What fires you up? What would you love to do? Learning about yourself. My God, most important subject of all.
Basically, and even the first chapter in your book it's literally just, who am I? And I think it's the biggest question,
isn't it? We go I'm still asking it.
That's it. We go through so much different things in our life, and I think, as you said in that book, it always kind of goes back to that question. In every aspect.
Completely. Man, you're like the Buddha. You're so wise. You could be teaching this stuff. When are you going to write your book?
I don't know. On the topic of school, being a teenager, I can have loads of different fears and worries, kind of, so maybe even surrounding school some of the times. There's a very good quote in your book called "The antidote to fear is courage," and it kind of really stood out to me. I would just like for you, if you could explain it more in detail.
Yeah, so the thing that I learned over time, and I learned this from an amazing psychologist in a husband and wife team in California. And I used to think about, if I had fear, that was a weakness, there was something wrong with me, and I had to just smash that fear. And then I learned from them that, well, you can't actually ever get rid of fear, because there's a part of you, maybe a very young, childish part of you, that holds that fear. And so you acknowledge it, but you deal with it, I suppose, or you ensure that it doesn't run your life, by building courage. And you build courage by doing things which you find challenging or fearful, and doing them again and again and again. So it's almost like, by repetition, it dismantles a lot of the fear, or at least it shows the fear that it's going to be okay. And then they can live at the same time. You can have fear about, say, for example, public speaking, or doing this, like, when I was coming online, says, okay, I hope I say all the right things. You can have that nervousness, but it's just like, it's like music in the background that you barely hear. You don't push it away. You don't turn it off. You say, I see you, I hear you, and it's okay, because I'm a big boy now and I can do this. And over time, you end up taking on more and more. So now I look back sometimes and I say to myself, if someone had said to me at 16, I would have done the things I've done in my life, I would have said, no way, that'll never happen. But for every one of them, there was a certain amount of fear involved. But the more I did, the more courageous I got, the more comfortable I got. And I think that's the real antidote to fear, is just to go towards what frightens you, bit by bit by bit. And over time, you'll build almost like more courage muscle to offset the fear muscle.
That's it. And it's even that kind of relates to me a lot at the minute, because
Right, go on.
stepping out of my comfort zone in TY is, I'm
Yeah,
like, I've played football since I was 8. I've been dancing, like, trying to
yeah,
learn dance routines and everything. But yeah,
yeah.
that's another story. Um
It sounds like a good story.
yeah.